The warm bed in the Paston house, a heavy wooden frame with a canopy, is listed in the inventory as carefully as the chest with silver and the barn with grain. No poems are recited on the bed. Here, sheets are counted, feather beds are evaluated, and labels on fabrics are checked. The letters contain no size, but orders for canvas, instructions to attorneys, and complaints about overdue debts. Outside the window, the cold Norfolk wind blows, papers rustle in the hallway, and every fold of fabric is a guarantee of credit, not a romantic hint. Intimacy within these walls is the order of the house. Who shares the master bedroom, with whom and when, who is responsible for the safety of the chests, how to treat a cold, so as not to disrupt a trip to the notary. Thus begins a chronicle, where a bed is a line in the budget, and tenderness is measured in money spent and letters returned. Dear viewers, welcome. Wherever you are watching from, please write in the comments. It helps the channel find its audience. Make yourselves comfortable. It will be calm and tense at the same time. I wish you pleasant listening. A family from Eastern England has been corresponding for decades, and the paper bears witness to what is rarely said aloud. Marriage is a risk, where the stake is equal to the dowry, and the interest rate is equal to reputation. The Pastons live in the shadow of great wars and small lawsuits, but their main front is the farm. When a suitor comes to the house, he is examined like a barrel of salted meat, not by his words, but by his payments and guarantors. When the bride makes her contribution, it turns into obligations, scheduled by deadlines. There is no courtly myth here. Letters record the amount of canvas, payments to doctors, the cost of storing grain, the condition of the castle, and, separately, the state of affairs with the spouse's room, because order in this room is directly related to peace outside the gates. If the husband leaves on business, the wife makes decisions and gives orders. Hire a craftsman, invite witnesses, pick up a copy from the scribe. In this scheme, love looks like a mutual ability to keep one's word and not destroy the creditworthiness of the family. While neighboring families argue about honor at feasts, the Pastons argue about honor in letters to their attorneys, because honor here is the ability to pay and not spread rumors that will bring down the stakes. As soon as someone jokes about a weak house, the fabric merchant begins to ask for prepayment, and the tenants delay their rent payments. And then the documents come into play. Inventories of furniture, lists of debts, letters from witnesses, entries in city records. What later legends would call intimacy is turned into accounting in these papers. Who is allowed to sleep in the master's room, and on what grounds? Who is responsible for the keys? How to record the overnight stay in the inventory if the spouse is away. The bed is a metaphor for trust, but above all, it is property that must be protected and confirmed. The legal scene is simple and strict. Parish courts ensure that marriage vows do not replace contracts, and contracts do not replace consent. The specified days of abstinence are not a sinister moral code, but a schedule that is taken into account when calculating trips and work. Domestic illnesses are described not for sympathy, but for the sake of postponing payment or summoning a witness. When the wife is ill, the husband is obliged to redistribute the work. When the husband is ill, the wife takes over the accounts with the shops. There is no poetic fog, only causes and consequences. Thus, the daily routine of the body is transformed into a system of schedules and obligations, and no novel can cancel the value of a seal on a letter. The correspondence also shows the other side of the coin. Any carelessness in words becomes a tool for opponents. It is enough for a neighbor to hint that things are not right in the house, for this to turn into a demand for collateral on the next purchase of cloth. Then the Pastons send copies, call witnesses, and remind them of old agreements. The marital bed comes into play again. Who has the keys to the room? Who decides when to give them out? Who is responsible for the night guest? Not because there is a sinful secret behind the door, but because any overnight stay is woven into the chain of property rights. If a relative is incorrectly entered into the room, tomorrow there will be a claim on the chest. This is how the first line of conflict develops. Honor is not an abstraction, but the value of credit history. In the urban environment of the 15th century, rumors spread faster than couriers. Their speed is a political variable. When a house gains a reputation for being troubled, its risk price rises. When a house demonstrates order, the risk falls. The Pastons try to stay within the bounds of predictability. They record every transfer of keys, every payment, every visit to the doctor. The letters do not hide the harshness of everyday life. Toothache lasts for weeks. A cold prevents a visit to the notary. The road is dangerous. The family's honor is more important than a carriage. Here, pain is a variable in an equation, not a reason for a story. Death is an item in the inheritance register. And yet, between the lines, the main thing can be felt. Mutuality drives the household better than any oaths. Not promises, but maintaining order in things, people, and days. This is where the first prepared twist appears. What will later be called almost vulgar details turns out to be dry parameters for the preservation of property in the documents. Not how and why, but who is responsible, when to record, what to lock up. This is not cooled love. It is adult discipline, which makes love possible without turning it into a risk asset. The myth of medieval poetry is shattered by lines written in blurred ink. A house lives by paying back debts and preventing leaks. And in this sober silence it becomes clear. True intimacy is the ability to keep the house afloat when there is war and inflation around you, and your only space is a neatly made bed, entered into the inventory as strictly as land and silver. When a house tries to expand its holdings, every crack in its reputation becomes a legal loophole. The Pastons engage in a protracted dispute over the estate, and the correspondence accumulates details that extinguish the romance for the later reader. The transport of sealed chests, the payment of guards, witness letters about field boundaries, receipts for the redemption of collateral. The account of love is kept in the same lines as the account for fabric. If the husband provides for his wife's right to a dowry, the house can be occupied for the future harvest. If the wife confirms her participation in the household, the tenant agrees to pay rent in advance. In this balance, the bed is not a place for sensual intrigue, but a place for the exchange of responsibilities. On weekdays, it is divided according to the needs of the household: who is sick, who is away, who is responsible for the keys at night and for the seal in the morning. The notary is not interested in other people's lives, but in ensuring that after the lock is changed, the chest contains exactly what is recorded in the deed. Further correspondence reveals a second line of conflict: the tug of war over honor through debt receipts. Relatives and neighbors pass judgment, and these opinions are instantly converted into financial terms. As soon as the phrase "their house is in disarray" appears, interest rates rise and goods have to be redeemed without delay. The Pastons respond in writing. They attach copies of promises, calculate the other side's delays, and remind them of witnesses and seals. Even the domestic order of intimacy becomes a legal variable here. If someone tries to portray the master's room as open, the house presents schedules, servants' signatures, night watchman's notes, not for the sake of morality, but for the sake of credit. A well-managed house does not allow an open room without legal grounds, because an open room turns into an open treasury. Thus, negative hints of disorder clash with key tables and lock registers. The myth cracks when there is a note on the door indicating to whom and for how long the key has been issued. The prepared twist is revealed at the intersection of family logic and city procedure. Honor unexpectedly turns out to be the crux of the debt instrument. The letters reveal how one of the neighboring families is trying to use gossip to invalidate the previous agreement on the wife's dowry, and thus remove part of the property from the collateral. On paper, it looks dry. A reference to the discrepancy in dates, a reference to bad reputation, a request to review the terms of the loan. But in essence, it is an attack on the heart of the home. The Pastons' response is again without poetry. Medical notes about illness to confirm the forced delay. Parish records of the spouse's presence on the relevant days to refute the insinuations. Witness statements and a list of keys to prove the continuity of ownership. What follows takes place not in the bedroom, but in the archives. The parties are asked to present records, not memories. The deeper you look into these letters, the clearer you see that the city courts and chancelleries of the 15th century fear most of all the murky zone where shame helpfully replaces fact. That is why the procedures are cautious to the point of pedantry. Without sworn witnesses and certified copies, A house cannot be deprived of a chest, a room, or a key. The punishment for frivolous accusations is not sudden divine retribution, but a loss of trust in the plaintiff, and a counterclaim for damage to reputation. In this system, intimacy ceases to be a screen for fantasies and becomes the strictest of household rules. Who has the right to marital cohabitation? How exceptions are recorded? How a room is transferred to storage mode when absent, where the seals are kept? And who is responsible for the sand in the sandbox for sprinkling? No body tests, just examination of seals and receipts. The documentary fabric of everyday life in the letters is rough. Illnesses are listed alongside purchases of salt, and anxiety about the outcome of a trial is listed alongside the price of wool. But behind this roughness, a third line emerges, the quietest and least conspicuous. Here, love is not text or image, but constant participation. While the husband explains to his attorney another delay in payment and the harm caused by rumors, the wife describes the state of the house, gatherings, visits, parish records. And from these scraps, a real closeness emerges. Not in words, but in continuous confirmation. Together, we hold up this heavy roof and do not let it fall. This does not negate the pain. Loved ones die, roads are dangerous, colds drag on, pregnancies can end in loss, treatment costs more than the fabric needed for a new set of bedding. But even these losses are described in accounts and orders so that the house survives and gets through the winter. Towards the end of the second block, the main mechanism of the era emerges. The louder the noise in the square about shame and debauchery, the more the courts lean towards paper and witnesses. The clerks do not fight morality. They recast it into the dimensions of print and the accuracy of dates. Today, a neighbor tries to instill shame. Tomorrow, a clerk asks, "Where is the copy? Where is the key? Where is the parish clerk's mark?" Shame flows away at the edges, and only legal density remains at the center. Thus, marriage returns to its boundaries, a contract that provides mutual protection with risks, installments, and mutual responsibility. And if somewhere in later retellings this story seems without love, the letters show the opposite. Love here is the ability to make sure that by morning the feather beds are dry, the keys are in place, the seals are intact, the debts are paid, and the house is ready for the next day. When the case over the disputed estate was finally scheduled for trial, the correspondence became like an endless accounting tape. The clerk asks for a certified copy of the old lease to be sent. The attorney responds with a list of witnesses. The wife describes where the keys to the rooms are kept and who is responsible at night. Evidence of the intimate arrangements of the house suddenly proved useful, not for moral reasons, but as indirect protection of rights. If the master's room was put into storage during the husband's absence, then the wife's chests and belongings could not be used as collateral for someone else's debts. This dry logic irritates neighbors, who find it more convenient to talk about bad reputation. but the courts are set up in such a way that rumors do not carry the weight of the seal. The letters contain details that make one feel uncomfortable. A cold has been dragging on for 3 weeks. The hand cannot hold a pen, but the receipt still needs to be signed. The driver has disappeared on the road, which means copies will have to be reordered. Candles are more expensive than usual, and the night spent checking the inventory turns into yet another expense. Everyday life is oppressive, but it is precisely this that confirms the main truth. It is not a loud voice that protects the interests of the family, but a meticulous archive. At this point, the next prepared twist is revealed. The opposing side, playing on the rumor of disorder, tries to prove that the dowry was improperly brought in, and therefore can be seized. On paper, this is a subtle operation. They substitute the concepts of cohabitation and joint ownership, forcing the reader to believe that the bed automatically opens the chests. The Paston's response breaks down the substitution. The inventory clearly distinguishes between personal belongings, shared items, and property that is sealed until the terms of the will are fulfilled. Parish records of compliance with established days and order of service attendance unexpectedly become part of the argument. The schedule of religious days explains when the room was not in use, and therefore which chest could not have been opened. Thus, intimacy, once again, becomes a wall of evidence. No one discusses feelings. Everyone is preoccupied with key roots and storage logic. Meanwhile, a new wave of rumors is sweeping through the city. Someone has spread the rumor of random visits, and it is eagerly repeated in places where people love conversation more than account books. The Pastons catch this wave with documents. Their correspondence includes the testimony of maids, guard schedules, and mentions of a broken lock that was immediately replaced and sealed. Even the treatment of a toothache and the payment of the doctor add up to a chain of events. The illness explains the temporary respite in the master's room, and therefore the inability to access the dowry chest. Shame again tries to cover up legal trickery, but the papers prove to be thicker than shame. The clerk, who is to compile this into a final memorandum, asks for everything to be stated without embellishment, and the house responds with the same stony prose. When the key was given out, when it was returned, who saw the seal, who counted the sheets? The closer the hearing gets, the more apparent it becomes how fragile the very possibility of justice is. Any lost receipt is a chance for the opponent. Any unclear date is a reason for delay. The wife carefully lists what she moved where, so that the night watchman would not mix up the trunks. And this caution seems scarier than loud conflicts. In the absence of romance, a different kind of courage emerges. Enduring 100 small humiliations of routine so that the house does not lose its face. Another twist emerges along these lines. The merchant, who previously supported his neighbors, sharply softens the conditions for the Pastons after seeing the neat inventories and matching seals on copies from different notaries. Market profit recognizes discipline better than neighbors do, and credit terms become a language of recognition. Where gossip considers itself a force, the market votes with receipts. The day in court brings less spectacle than the crowd expected. There are no physical trials, no humiliating procedures, no admissions of shame. There is reading, verification, comparison. The secretary monotonously lists when the room changed from one regime to another, how the wear and tear of bedding was written off, what seals were affixed to copies of contracts. The opposing side tries to slip hints into the protocol, but each hint slips away like water from oiled fabric. Without a witness, without a seal, without a date, it is not a fact. The crowd is bored. They were expecting punishment, like at a fair, but got accounting instead. But it is precisely in boredom that protection lies. The drier the text, the less room there is for arbitrariness. When the meeting is adjourned for a summary of conclusions, the House exhales, not because it has won, but because it has kept up the pace. In the evening, they repair the locks again, write down the remains of the candles in a notebook, count the linen, and record the doctor's visit. There is no victorious rhetoric, only a return to the same order that became the main argument. The Pastons are no better or worse than their neighbors. They are simply more persistent on paper. And this reveals another truth of the era. The myth of love poetry does not disappear here. It simply retreats to where it belongs, into personal expectations. And the house that wants to survive speaks to the world in the language of inventory, seals, and keys. When you put these letters together in a hefty volume, you hear not the voice of a singer, but the creak of a chest. And with this creak, the house asserts its right to tomorrow. The house approaches the final phase of the proceedings as it approaches winter, without illusions, with emphasized economy and attention to detail. There are few candles left, and their consumption is recorded separately, because every late night spent making copies is not only tiring, but also a direct expense. The clerks compile the inventories into a single book, stitch the edges, and affix wax seals so that the ribbon runs through all the pages, not just the cover. The attorney has double evidence at the ready. One set for the city case, and one for the counterclaim for malicious rumors. Next to it lies a bundle of cut counting sticks, and their notches speak to the judge no worse than Latin formulas. Something was paid, something was returned, somewhere the term was extended. This taciturn architecture of time and money turns out to be the only scene that the court believes. At the hearing, both sides change tactics. Seeing that shame is not taking hold, the opponents try legal maneuvering. They propose to recognize some letters as private correspondence without legal force, and the maid's notes as official, not testimonial. On paper, the dispute looks dry, but at its core lies another attempt to take away the dowry through renaming. The Pastons respond by separating the levels. The private note is backed up by a parish mark, confirming the presence of the spouses on the specified days. The maid's inventory is certified by the clerk's hand. The key from the master's bundle is signed by date, which completely coincides with the consumption of candles and the changing of the guard. There are no beautiful moves in this chess game, only a stack of notebooks where each line is stitched to another. The court slowly leans toward the position that the intimate nature of the room proves that the chests and boxes remained untouched and could not be used as collateral without the wife's consent. Rumors are still trying to penetrate the protocol through third parties, but city law, tired of the fatal lightness of accusations, closes this door. The judge demands something tangible: a seal, a juror, a date, a coincidence. There is no place for the ritual of humiliation. The crowd outside the court walls is disappointed. They were promised spectacle and purification. But instead, they get a minute-by-minute analysis of the root of the keys and candle smoke. But it is precisely in this refusal to put on a show that protection is hidden. When the world replaces evidence with shame, the weak perish first. When evidence is replaced by shame, pedants survive. Pastors have always been just that. Between hearings, the correspondence is filled with the harsh and mundane concerns of the body. The wife's hand is swollen, and she dictates a letter because the signature must be made with the same hand that signed the inventory. Her husband has a fever, and his neighbors confirm his presence at work so that no one can use his illness as an excuse to question their cohabitation. The doctor receives money and a receipt, which are immediately added to the case file. The illness explains the forced change in routine and the inability to attend a number of meetings. The pain is not described in detail, but it is visible in indirect traces. The changed slant of the letters, the trembling lines of the print, the strangely early purchase of candles. This honor, built on quiet pain, is stronger than any loud oath. Meanwhile, a third, less obvious turn of events takes place. Merchants, observing the sluggish progress of the process, realize that if their neighbor's precedent is accepted, the market will lose its predictability. Any dowry can be undermined by whispers and cunning references to custom. Then two influential merchants propose a compromise. Recognize the validity of the inventory and seals, clear the dowry of any claims, establish the order of access to the master's room as a legal storage regime, and transfer the disputed part of the debts to installments secured by the future harvest. This looks like a defeat for the romantic idea of marriage. But for the market, it is a return to the meaning of trust. With this approach, paper is once again trusted more than words. The court listens carefully because the compromise reduces the risk for the city as a whole. The house, weary from the weight of months, neither celebrates nor cries. It transfers the keys from one bunch to another, as the new order dictates, and leaves a wooden sign at the door where the future clerk can sort out the changing regimes of the room. The sharpness disappears from the letters, and the small print becomes denser. A new section appears in the register, agreed storage, and it echoes the main argument. The bed is not a place for prying eyes, but its order has legal value. And while the immediate neighbors still whisper ancient formulas, merchants and scribes are already counting candles and accepting ribbons with the correct seals for payment. Thus, intimacy as accounting reaches its logical conclusion. It ceases to be a vulnerability and becomes what it has always been in these letters, part of the language of property, in which the house claims its right to tomorrow. The end is almost in sight. All that remains is to wait for the decision to be recorded and file a counterclaim for damage to reputation in a mild form so as not to start a new feud. The house chooses the path of survival rather than revenge, to agree to an installment plan, to secure the inviolability of the dowry, to renew the keys, to give a copy of the new schedule to the parish. There is no poetry in this, but there is that indifferent justice that can keep a roof over one's head, bread on the table, and a warm bed. And if someone asks where the love is in these papers, the answer will be the very creak of a bound book. Love is when empty pages are left for next winter, because the house hopes to live to see it. The decision comes not with thunder, but with a dry rustle. The court approves the installment agreement, separately stipulates the inviolability of the dowry and the storage regime of the master's room as a legal fact, and recognizes rumors as harmful and subject to refutation, without punishment, which would give the crowd new blood. For the house, this sounds not like a victory, but like a return to zero where it is possible to work again. The Pastons enter a new line about the keys in the register, change the order of removing the seals, arrange the copies in chests, take one set to the parish, another to the notary, and leave the third with the attorney. In the letters, there is not a single superfluous word, only a sequence of actions: to whom to return the deposit, how to pay the doctor, how to count the barrels of salt until spring. At the edge of the sheet, there is a barely noticeable note that the sheets are more worn than usual due to long nights in the cold, and this trifle is also recorded because there is nothing in the house that cannot be turned into an account. The city reacts faster than anyone else. Merchants charge a risk premium. The tenant confirms the rent. The shop gives fabric on the usual terms. And even the skeptical neighbor is silent for a while, because the dispute has dispelled the temptation of shame and taught him to look at the ribbons and seals. In the street noise, attempts to retell the story as a story about a bad house can still be heard, but the storytellers lack numbers and dates, which means that their version sinks into the everyday viscosity of facts. Dryness prevails. The order of keys and candle counts are impersonal. There is nothing to grab onto, and that is precisely why they are reliable. This is not a moral triumph or purification. It is a return to manageable risk, where someone's honor no longer serves as currency for someone else's gain. After a few weeks, the correspondence thins out like the air before snow. life falls into a rut, a trip to relatives, to confirm the boundaries of the field, buying wool from the old supplier, looking for apprentices to repair the roof. Everyday ailments do not disappear. The road remains dangerous. Winter remains cold. But now, the house is confident that it will not be attacked by whispers about the bedroom, disguised as the law. The notary issues a certified inventory, and the wax clearly shows the smooth path of the seal, like the tracks of a sleigh on early frost. Inside the house, it is quieter. People serve the house as they serve the stove, not out of respect for the myth, but because without it, the house dies. In this bright silence, intimacy returns to its natural state, the quiet habit of sharing warmth with someone within the boundaries that the house protects with documents. If you turn around and look at the whole chain of letters, a simple and cruel truth of the era emerges, where the myth of the poetry of love serves as a screen. Attacks through shame become possible, where paper and procedure maintain boundaries. Shame is devalued, and only what can be verified remains. These people are neither saints nor villains. They are survivors. They have learned to turn the vulnerable parts of life into records, not to kill feelings, but to protect them from the market and malice. And when someone in the future tries to see vulgarity in this story, it would be more honest to call it by another word: maturity. Because maturity here is not in correct speech or edification, but in the ability to lock the chest, stitch up a book, endure rumors without destroying the home, and come home in the evening to a bed where what awaits is not a myth, but that very warm human world for which all this stone accounting was conducted.